Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Strategy Skills podcast. Today's guest is quite an interesting individual, and the topic is cybersecurity with Adam Levin. Now, the thing about Adam is that he has a unique tendency to discuss cybersecurity at the level of consumers, at the level of business, and at the level of government. Because what all too often happens when you talk about things like password protection and so on, we tend to think of it as a consumer issue. But as the conversation with Adam will show, it cuts across all levels. In fact, it goes all the way to being a pillar of the armed forces. So Adam was at one stage, when he was 27, the youngest director in the history of the New Jersey division of, I believe it was Consumer Affairs. And he's also a graduate of Stanford University and the University of Michigan Law School. And he's created many different companies such as Credit.com, which I believe he's now sold, that play in the space of understanding how to protect one's identity, one's credit score, one's portfolio of investments, and so on. Now, he's appeared in many different places. He's a well-known person and a well-known authority in this space. So I really hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hi, Adam. It's great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I am terrific, and I very much appreciate the fact you've invited me.
It's actually a great time to be speaking to you. So I've been a long-time follower of your work. And one of the things I've noticed is when you see what's happening with COVID, there's been a huge push by companies to digitize their operations, whether it's e-commerce and so on. But at the same time, have we become too complacent in the way we are doing digital transactions? I mean, is it safe for us to be doing so many things online as the safety caught up with the hype?
Well, I certainly think as innovation evolves, security has not kept up with it. But the other issue, too, is that you can have the greatest security in the world. And as an organization, you can be completely secure at 9 a.m.
Yes.
But unfortunately, someone clicks on the wrong link, makes a mistake, and you could be exposed by 9:01 and have a serious breach on your hands. Because, again, as a defender, you need to get everything right. As an attacker, you only need to find one crack or crevice to crawl through for a few seconds, and then you're in. And of course, with COVID, the other phenomenon that evolved is the whole concept of working remotely.
Yes.
I mean, in the old days, you would be concentrated in an office environment that would be, the security would be controlled, and it would be easier to monitor systems and networks. Today, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon how you view it, with the ability to work remotely, that creates an entirely new paradigm in terms of what companies are dealing with in order to be safe and secure.
I've never thought about that. That's an excellent point. When we think about digital security, we think about the software, the coding, and so on. But today you could have a banker working in Starbucks who leaves his laptop unattended for 5 minutes to pick up a latte. And anything could happen. So it's introduced a whole different kind of risk that we've never considered before.
Completely accurate. And the other issue, too, is that many people who work from home use shared devices.
Yes.
And
That's
oftentimes they're sharing those devices with their children. And children can be weapons of mass destruction when it comes to the family.
Yeah.
And not only that, but if you're using a shared device and malware gets into your system, and then you log on to the system of the company you're working for, that malware can basically infect a network, and then you can bring a company down, all because a child saw something that was bright, shiny, new, exciting, clicked on the link, and a whole world of hurt followed.
So when I started working at home, I never really thought about the security around my Wi-Fi system. I didn't think of it as an issue. I don't think anyone thinks of that when they start working at home. So clearly some kind of fraud and attacks must have taken place. But doesn't this put a big burden on employees working at home to have to do all these things they're not trained to do and don't have time to do?
It definitely creates a burden for them. And one of the suggestions I make to a lot of organizations is don't assume that your employees are going to get it right, because they're human.
Yes.
So therefore, you need to think ahead. And one of the ways you think ahead is create an employee-only device, which means this device can only be used for work, that all of the security that on this device, this is the software and the like, is approved by the company, is installed by the company, and that you can't download anything onto your device like, let's say, an exciting app that
Yeah.
may not be so exciting when you find out it comes with unwanted or dark passengers, as they say, and that the company is pretty much in control, at least as to the security of the device. Now, this doesn't mean that someone may not lend it to a child and that child or another member of the family might click on the wrong link. But in general, you have to make it very clear that there is a zero tolerance policy when it comes to sharing this device or using this device for anything other than work. Now, that should be a little different when it comes to the concept of zero tolerance if somebody in an organization makes a mistake. You want people to feel like it's okay if they make a mistake to notify management and say, look, I may have clicked on the wrong link. The problem is that many companies don't know that someone did something that maybe they shouldn't have done, and that bleeds into the organization and can kill the organization. So people have to feel like they're part of a community, that community has a stake in the privacy and security of the organization, that everyone contributes to it, and that everyone needs to be an active participant in it and take ownership of it.
In my previous life, I was a management consulting partner, traveling quite extensively and always working on my laptop from restaurants and coffee shops and hotel lounges and so on. And I remember at the time, there was a company policy whereby we would have to have a different phone for work and a different personal phone. And we weren't allowed to download anything onto the company phone. It was very slim, very basic, just take calls and access email and so on. But that's changing now. I've seen companies whereby they're allowing what they call a single phone policy, where you have one phone for personal, one phone for business. But how do you then manage all of the risks that come with that? And why is that shift taking place?
Well, first of all, it's taking place because it's inconvenient for a lot of people to use two different devices. I mean, we lived through an American political campaign where one of the major issues in the campaign was that one of the candidates had used a private email server and then did everything on the same device. And I realized that it's more efficient to do things on the same device, but it's more dangerous. Not to mention the fact that if you walk in the house with two devices, your spouse may say, what is that device and why do you need another device?
Yes.
That's a whole host of other issues. But that being said, you really have to have a strict policy about this because so much is at stake. Just like when people say, well, why can't I save my user ID and password for every website I use? I mean, come on, it's faster.
Yeah.
And the answer is because in those few seconds that it takes you to log in to an account, you could be protecting your organization far more than being able to do something instantly, because the whole concept of cyber is instant gratification can be extremely dangerous.
So I just want to understand this point here. You're saying that you shouldn't keep a record of your password?
Well, first of all, you should have a password manager.
Yes.
Because I think that they're much more efficient and effective, or there are some people that like to use pass phrases.
Yes.
And if you use a passphrase, it shouldn't be a phrase that is a logical phrase. It should be a phrase consisting of different words that are totally disassociated. And even then, using symbols and numbers to replace some of the letters. But how do you remember all of that? Because, another area where people get themselves in a lot of trouble is they may come up with what they believe is a completely indecipherable password.
Yeah.
But then they use it everywhere and they forget that indecipherable password could be exposed as part of a data breach where the company that they're using this password hasn't properly encrypted the data, and hackers can see this and then just simply go everywhere and try everything, brute force attack and the like, to get into those accounts that they believe this individual may be using and use that to leapfrog into their business or all of their personal information.
But this must be so hard to manage because, as an example, if I pick up my iPhone and I scroll through the App Store, I see an app I want to download, it seems legitimate. I put it onto my phone. I don't know the guys who developed it. I don't know if it's one person sitting in his apartment with the best of intentions, but everything is stored on a server running off his computer at home and is not even encrypted. So it's a very difficult thing to do. But why don't people take it seriously enough? I mean, there must be horror stories out there of seemingly benign actions that led to terrible consequences for people.
Oh, there are terrible consequences that come from it. Just for example, if you remember the iconic breach of Target, which
Yes.
was, one of the big box retailers in the US, iconic retailer. And they didn't go through the front door. They compromised someone working at the HVAC subcontractor to Target. And they used the access that subcontractor had into the Target systems to get into their point of sale system, to get into their databases. And a very important thing for everyone to realize is you may look in the mirror and see you
Yes.
and say, I'm just a regular person. Why would anyone, or I work for a small company. Why would anyone want me or my company to be a target for them?
Yes.
And the answer is, you may see you in the mirror, but when a threat actor sees you, they're looking at Jay-Z, they're looking at Beyonce, they're looking at Adam Levine. You got what they want. And what they want is passwords, data, financial information, or you're the tributary to a much larger river. So their eye is not on you per se. It's on your spouse, your employer, maybe your kids, depending upon where they work, maybe an organization with which you're affiliated, or your company. And you are simply the conduit in.
Yes. And the attack on Target, as an example, it wouldn't be opportunistic. That seems like an organized attack with professionals behind it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's some that say it was China, some say it was Russia, some say it was North Korea. I mean, I think they've determined who it was. But, the bottom line is there is a difference between sort of widespread blanket phishing attacks, where they just hope to collect somebody that's going to fall for it. And more now, they're very targeted attacks where they zero in on an organization and then they study the organizational chart of that organization. And as an example, you may work for a specific company and be in a specific role, but you're on LinkedIn. And so are a number of other people on LinkedIn from your organization. And they can look at LinkedIn and they can determine, okay, if I use this person to get to this person, to get to this person, they do their research. They are very methodical. One thing about folks these days, the bad actors, is they are creative, they are persistent, and they are sophisticated.
So I don't know much about the details on the theft with Target in particular. I mean, I have seen other instances, but these so-called bad actors, in inverted commas, what are they hoping to gain from this? Is it data? Is it ransoms?
It's a variety of things. And come to think of it, it was a Russian hacking group that went after Target.
So they went shopping at Target, basically.
They went shopping at Target. Yes, they did. And they're after all of the things that you mentioned. They want data. They want access. They want the ability to, if they wish to, put ransomware on the computer because they get paid faster.
Yes.
And they're also looking for intellectual property, trade secrets, or if it's a government agency, they may be looking for spies, for instance. I mean, there were people who felt that the attack on the Office of Personnel Management in Washington, D.C., originally it was like, oh, they just wanted to steal 21 million Social Security numbers and get access to these sensitive personnel files. Well, that was part of it. But the reason was because it was an intelligence gathering operation. Because after that, there were attacks on hotels and airlines. And it at least has been speculated that all of that information put together could help a country determine who might be working for the intelligence community and where that individual was and when they were there. So, every hack has some theme behind it. It could be a state-sponsored hack where it's espionage, intelligence gathering, or in the case of certain countries, it becomes a line in their budget because they're generating revenue by selling the data that they get their hands on. So you have state-sponsored, you have for-profit hackers, which are in many cases just purely economic. You have cause hackers, and that's because someone is upset about something and they want to take down an organization in order to send a message. And then you have the because I can hackers, which is they want to be able to brag within their community. Look what I did.
So it's a much more complicated world than we think. In fact, it's almost as if when you have a hack that takes place for Target, for example, and I apologize for using Target as such a big example here,
Oh, sure.
we don't know what the consequences are going to be because we don't know who broke in and why they broke in.
Correct. Oftentimes you don't, but more and more they're getting better at determining who did it and why they did it. And, just for example, with ransomware, you see that there's been much more aggressive enforcement now
Yes.
by countries that are kind of banding together. Now, there are, of course, countries where hackers are not only beyond the pale of the United States or NATO countries of the EU, and they are under the protection of, or at least operating with the tacit approval of a particular government. So, you have that situation as well.
But this must be something that's happening across the world. If one country invests in this capability, others are going to follow suit. It's an arms race.
No, it is definitely an arms race. It is definitely a situation where there could be theoretically a Cybergeddon one day.
Yeah.
Which is where someone gets into real critical infrastructure. Of course, there was a story not too long ago about a really funny debate that was occurring between an agricultural combine and a group of ransomware group, where this agricultural group was saying, hey, we're part of critical infrastructure. And the ransomware group was saying, no, you're not. And they were going, well, no, because we have to do with agriculture, and agriculture is part of food processing, and people need to eat. It's critical. It's like when JBS went down. So it's, you will see these stories, and some of them are fascinating. Some of them are hysterical. Most of them are terrifying and sad.
So sometimes I'm just taking an example to prove a point here.
Mm-hmm.
If we read a story about Delta Airlines, for example, experiencing some outage on its computerized booking system, that could very well be an attack. We just don't know.
It could be an attack. It could be a ransomware related attack where, again, with ransomware, the question is not how much is your data worth out there on the dark web, but how much is access to your data worth to you? We saw that with the National Health System in Britain when that went down. And I think in Ireland, their health system went down and they were reduced to pencil and paper, and lives were in jeopardy. Yes. So it depends upon if someone is just wishing to sow chaos for the purpose of sowing chaos, that's one thing. If people want to sow chaos for the purpose of actually doing something incredibly destructive and putting lives in harm's way, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And there are different groups. Remember when at the beginning of COVID, there were a number of ransomware combines that took the position, we will continue to do what we do, but we will not do it involving any institution that's health related.
So there is an ethical compass there somewhere.
Yeah, they said we have a code. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people in their line of work who didn't have a code. So even if some groups refrained from it, other groups exploited it and profited from it. So it really depends upon the group. And as you know, they're not necessarily completely structured organizations. They come together for certain projects, many of which are on the dark side, and then they disperse, and then they reconfigure themselves doing other things. So it's fluid. It's very fluid.
It's very hard to pin down, very hard to go after them. What about the data that's taken? There must be some marketplace for this data.
Oh, there are. In the dark web, there's a marketplace for data, and it actually has prices attached to it. And it's everything from fulls, F-U-L-L-Z, which is everything on an individual's life, to, for instance, millions of credit and debit cards are stolen and sold on the dark web every day by different categories, which is, what is the available balance you can get your hands on? Or is this rewards related?
Yeah.
Or by zip code, because if you steal by zip code and then you use it, it is perhaps a little less likely that it will be picked up by bank tracking systems, depending upon where you live, work, and normally shop. That's why we suggest to people that they get what's called transaction monitoring, which notifies them every time there's a transaction in their account. It's good for companies too. When transactions are done in their account, they get notification of it because the bank may miss it, but hopefully they won't.
That's interesting, because when I go anywhere and I'm doing a transaction outside my regular habits, I do get an email from the bank saying, hey, this went through, was it you, and so on. But Correct. This is pretty scary.
But that's outside your pattern.
Yes,
If
outside
it's
my pattern.
correct, if
I
it's
don't want to get
inside your
emails.
pattern, they may miss it. They may see an ATM withdrawal that occurred around the corner from your house or your
Yeah.
apartment and go, well, that's normal, but it may not be.
So it sounds to me here like it's a cat and mouse game whereby the institutions, or some cases individuals, put together protocols to prevent these kind of thefts, and then the bad actors figure out the protocols and work around it.
Every single time. It's like the old saw with the stock market. Every time you think you figured it out, you find out that you didn't. And in the
Yes.
case of cyber, every time we think we figured out what the problem was and moved to solve it, somebody is clever enough to figure out a way around it. That's why with ransomware in particular, you'll note that over the years, every time a particular strain of malware is discovered and they come up with some kind of solution against it, all of a sudden they find out that someone tweaked it just a little bit
Yes.
that made it undetectable.
It always makes me think about things like artificial intelligence, because at least now the algorithms and code, there's a human there that controls things and can pass through it and understand it. But what happens when we have software thinking for itself and we don't know what's going on? It's a whole.
Well, that's kind of like the difference between AI and machine learning. Is machine learning requires somebody to be involved, where AI kind of is off on its own world.
And that's the scary part.
Yes, that's true.
Because if someone tweaks the code, you don't even know it's been tweaked.
That's correct.
Operating the way it's meant to be operating, thinking for itself. So as an individual, let's look at this at different levels. As an individual, what should we be doing to protect ourselves?
Well, I put a framework together in a book I wrote called Swiped, and it's called the 3Ms.
Mm-hmm.
How do you minimize your risks of exposure, reduce your attackable surface? Not easy as it is, but certainly in a world where you have billions of Internet of Things devices growing geometrically, all tracking, in some cases, eavesdropping, sending information back, arguably to manufacturers, but unfortunately, people hack in. They come with default passwords that are for sale on the dark web, or something as simple as admin, which someone can figure out. And most people don't change those passwords when they get them. So you have all of these billions of devices. We are living in I know there are, in some countries, it's considered a surveillance society, but even in countries where you don't have a surveillance society, which are very few, you still have a surveillance economy. And so how do you reduce your attackable surface in that? How do you monitor so you effectively know you have a problem as quickly as possible? And then how do you manage the damage? So examples I can give you in the US is everything from password protocols, long and strong passwords not shared across your universe of accounts, getting a password manager, which can not only inventory your passwords if you choose to do them yourself, but has the capability of creating passwords, and they're multi-platform. So it's either a drop down or, depending upon what kind of password manager you use. The second thing, multi-factor authentication, which is it relies on either something you have, something that's you, like a retinal scan, a thumbprint, or something which are security questions. The only problem with security questions is most people answer them honestly. So as a result, and most people post voraciously on social media. And as a result, anyone following them can ultimately figure out what their passwords are. So I always say, lie like a superhero, Superman, Batman. They wouldn't be telling you who they are, or vice versa. Not authenticating yourself to anyone that contacts you.
Give me an example of that. Give me an example of that. That sounds quite important.
Okay, well, you get a call from the Internal Revenue Service in the U.S. First of all, they don't call.
Yeah, they don't call. And they don't answer the phone as well.
Right. They don't answer the phone. They don't text. They don't email.
Yes.
But you get a call from someone representing themselves to be from an organization that terrifies you, like the IRS.
Yes.
Or the police department, or the jury commission. Or you get a call from someone representing themselves to be from your bank. We've had cases where someone would call and say, Bob, you go, yeah, this is your credit card, right? And you go, well, yes, because they already said they're from your bank. You looked at the caller ID on your phone. It says the name of the bank. And then they say, okay, and this is the expiration date on your card, correct? Yes. Now, would you just flip over your card and read us your security code? Because we want to make sure that you're really you.
I like that. They
Or we
turn the
had a case with somebody who's a very sophisticated trader in the US during the trading day who gets a call from the IRS. They seem to know an awful lot about him. And they say to him, by the way, these are the last 4 digits of your social. Just to prove you're you, tell us the first 5, which he did. And he said, when he mentioned the 5th digit, he suddenly said, I got to call Adam. I messed up. So, we've seen things like that. So don't authenticate yourself to someone. Don't just randomly click on links or open attachments. We've seen where people get something they think is from a senior manager in their organization as saying there's an attachment involving a new compensation plan or whatever it is, our new security plan. And they click on it. And all of a sudden, malware gets into the network of the organization. So always independently verify where an email or text comes from or phone call. And then you make the call directly to that organization. Or if it's in your company, you call the person who supposedly sent you the email and say, did you send me an email? And is this what you requested? Because we've seen case after case after case where people go, I never sent that. What are you talking about? There was a case in Europe not too long ago of someone who was the CEO of a portfolio company receiving a phone call from someone who was the head of the parent company, and they knew this person's voice. They'd heard them speak, and this person requested that they wire $200,000 to a designated account, which they did, only to find out that it was a deep fake audio. The money was gone, and they were fired.
That's incredible. Deep fake.
Deep fake.
I've seen it, I've heard about it, but I've never seen an example whereby it's been used just in a conventional way. It's always seemed something science fiction almost. It's going to come one day, but it's already arrived.
Well, AI was science fiction. It's here. Machine learning was science fiction. It's here. The concept of attacks on critical infrastructure for years was the stuff of science fiction. It's here. So we're there now. We're there, and it is way past midnight when it comes to organizations properly securing themselves and governments and organizations sharing threat information. The most important thing that you can do is train people so that they understand what the threats are, what the red flags are, what they need to do about it, and then put them in an environment where they feel comfortable in talking to each other and to senior management about it.
I think one of the challenges that we have with societies, whenever discussions like this come up, it generally appears in the consumer finance section when it's also a national security issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And more people are realizing how much of a national security issue it is, especially with all of these ransomware attacks. I mean, now they're talking about this new problem that is considered a 10 out of 10 vulnerability, which was Log4j. And this is where you're dealing with open source software.
Yes.
Which, as you know, built by volunteers, released to the public for free, monitored by volunteers, patches issued routinely. Because again, if you think about the internet is really an iterative thing. It's a process. And that you create, it breaks. You fix it, you improve it, it breaks. Someone figures out a way in, you figure out a way to secure it, it could break. So it goes on and on and on. Here is a situation where this is software that is sort of a living, breathing part of the internet that people use. And it has to do with giving you visibility into the log files of an organization. And unfortunately, a vulnerability was discovered. They issued a patch. There was a flaw in the patch. They issued a patch to that. And because it's coming at the holiday season, not every company can apply that patch quickly. So it's kind of like you have a 0-day exploit where the time to act was yesterday, but most people won't be available until the day after New Year's. So, and these are the kinds of threats and issues that we face.
So it's almost scary if you're the chief digital officer of a company to realize that there's just so many angles that can be used to exploit. Even if you have the best software and the best systems, which is impossible to have, there's always going to be some flaw, a mishap from an employee's side, whereby they either open the wrong thing, download the wrong thing, share their phone. Anything could lead to problems. Even the most benign thing whereby you download an app that may have some vulnerability in it. It was not intended to be that way, but it then creates a backdoor into your phone.
No, and what happens is these weapons, because a lot of technology has been weaponized for the benefit of threat actors, is the consequences are intended, but the way they get in often represents the unintended consequence. So, people can't think of everything at every moment of every day. I try to liken it to the fact that we all have day jobs.
Yes.
We work for somebody, we run a company, we're raising a family, we're involved in educational pursuits, we're involved in philanthropic pursuits. That's our day job. The people that we're up against, we are their day job. And our company was involved in doing election security, working with a number of states. And if you think about it, let's say you're the Secretary of State or the person responsible for information security of a small rural county in a small Midwestern state, and you find yourself facing off against Russia, China, North Korea. It's not a fair fight.
No.
And you're not going to win. You're not going to win. And, one mistake, like Bruce Schneier, who's considered a lion in the cybersecurity world, an incredibly brilliant guy. And, his comment was that if you think that throwing money at technology is going to solve your security problems, then you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the security issues, period. Because it's all about humans, and we're fallible and we are imperfect and we make mistakes. We just make mistakes. And threat actors are absolutely counting on that fact. Distraction leads to vulnerability. Vulnerability gives them the opening, and the opening gives them access.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm thinking through, trying to recall the press releases and the responses companies have put together after a major data breach. And it's almost always a situation of them spending more to increase their IT budget, to put in place better processes and technology. But the human element is never discussed.
Never. And it's all about training. Now, and in the US, of course, we have a very bifurcated system. I mean, we don't have a national breach notification law. So as a result, you have about 54 separate jurisdictions between states, territories, commonwealths, cities, and they all have different laws. And as an organization, now you're facing this. It's terrifying. So organizations have to implement the same 3 M's, which is, minimizing risk, monitoring, managing the damage. And I can talk about both humans and companies.
Yes.
But with companies, it's all about, do you segment data? Do you have password protocols? Do you use multi-factor authentication? Are you training your people, understanding that your employees represent your worst nightmare and yet your best friend? They are the first line of attack, but yet they are also the last line of defense. And now we talk about zero trust environments where it's not like you build a moat and hope they don't get in. And if they get in, you're doomed. It's more like you try to protect the data when it's coming in, and then protect it through the entire cycle that it's in. But, again, minimizing your risk of exposure, things you would do is you would only keep data as long as you needed it, and you would only collect the data that you absolutely needed. And then you would restrict access to that data on need to know and need to use within the organization. Then with monitoring, it's everything from not using the concept of patch and pray. Yes. It's more like we have a vulnerability assessment and management program. This is how we do it. This is when we do it. This is how frequently we do it. We have strict protocols. Like, for instance, the big hack at Equifax. There was a warning signal sent. A patch had been issued. They were directed to apply the patch. Somebody forgot to apply the patch. Nobody was properly monitoring to know they didn't apply the patch. And they basically exposed the information of 150 million people, that's a number.
That's a big number.
And then managing the damage, which is so important. This is everything from organizations doing what they call tabletop exercises, which is you prepare for the incident. You try to come up with every possible point of access that you may have. You also map your data so you know where it is within your organization. So many organizations don't even know what they have. And even if they have an idea of what they have, they don't know where they have it. So you do these exercises, and then when the inevitable occurs, because unfortunately, breaches have become the third certainty in life behind death and taxes. When the inevitable occurs, you are as ready for it as you can possibly be, that you know what the call tree is, you know who you have to notify, you know how you have to notify them. You also, this is a company-wide effort. It's not just the IT department. This has got to be HR, legal, IT, communications, outside cyber organizations, outside communication organizations, because if a company has an issue and they do not respond urgently, transparently, and empathetically, they're going to be in trouble with the regulators. They're going to be in trouble with the class action lawsuit attorneys. They're going to lose client trust. They're going to lose partner trust, and they could even lose vendor trust. And now it becomes something from what would have been a really bad incident, but that was well handled, to a near extinction or extinction level event for an organization.
It would seem to me that it would be better if companies and individuals who experience these problems came forward publicly, because then you could see what is happening and you could look for patterns and you can understand what are the best practices the so-called bad actors are using. But on the flip side, most people are embarrassed to talk about these things.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a podcast called What the Hack with Adam Levin. And the point of it is that we have people come on who share what they live through, whether it's the chief information officer of an organization that was hit with ransomware, and he performed brilliantly, to individuals that have fallen for catfishing attacks, or they've been scammed by different imposters for different things. They've fallen for gift card scams. The list goes on and on and on. Apartment scams. And people are willing to talk about it. And it's the concept of creating a shame-free zone, which should be what organizations do. And the government does, which is, if you're a company, you had a problem, tell us. We're here to work with you. Now, I know, because we work with the FBI, the FBI is out there soliciting companies saying, talk to us, get to know us, get to know how to contact us, who to talk to if you have a problem. Our goal is not to hurt you. Our goal is to help stop the bleeding and protect your clients and customers, your employees, your organization from a disaster. So it's really all about threat sharing. Now, I know there are lots of ISACs, which are individual organizations made up of members of a particular segment or sector, and they share information, and they do threat assessments, and they share threat assessments. And if you remember, one of the problems that happened, like for instance with the NSA, with Eternal Blue, which was the one of the malware disasters that occurred that led to WannaCry and a number of other ones, was they were collecting information on vulnerabilities, but they weren't telling anybody about them, because obviously, if they knew what the vulnerability was, they could better protect themselves against it and go after threat actors, because they could keep an eye on things. Unfortunately, what happened is many companies were hurt, and many millions of consumers, employees, customers, partners, they were hurt because nobody was sharing the information. So there's now a policy for much more information sharing than there was before.
That's interesting, because most people are so embarrassed to talk about this that they would rather keep the information to themselves and help other people. But they don't understand that by sharing more, everyone wins in this.
Sharing is caring in this, just like scaring is caring, as far as I'm concerned. We have to scare people in order to understand the dangers they face, and they have to be willing to talk to people about it. The only way we're going to find a solution is we have to determine what the problem is. And each one of these vulnerabilities is a problem. And, a friend of mine recently said, and I thought it was very, very insightful. He said, the whole concept of the internet process, you have situations, they're not crises, but because we don't face these situations head on and handle them routinely, they become a crisis.
There's actually a good way of thinking about it. In fact, sometimes these are early warnings of a flaw to be fixed before it gets really bad.
Correct. It's like cancer. Depending upon the kind of cancer it is, if you catch it early enough, it's treatable. You go into remission, and you may ultimately be cancer-free, depending upon what it is. But it's all about catching it early, treating it, and then monitoring the treatment to make sure you did the right thing.
Yeah, I think one mindset to have, and I remember speaking to this with clients as well in the digital space, is that if your company is going to be around for a good few years and you're going to be continuously investing in technology, you should use this as almost a battle testing routine, whereby every time something goes wrong, it gives you a chance to relook at your processes, improve things, make things better. And you can only get better by going into actual combat as opposed through simulations. And you should see this as an actual combat opportunity. You want to avoid it as much as possible, but when it happens, try to get as much as you can out of it to improve yourself. And I think a lot of companies don't see that. They just see it as a crisis to be avoided, swept under the rug as quickly as possible, as opposed to using it as a chance to really go down into the nuts and bolts and find out what happened and what they could have done better.
That's why there should be incentives. And, beyond the whole concept of my incentive is I didn't lose all my employees and I didn't lose all my customers or my partners. Yeah. There needs to be an incentive system, just like, I've said to certain colleagues of mine who are in Congress, I said, look, instead of figuring out ways to beat companies to death, you need to figure out, for instance, tax credit for companies that do it right.
Yes.
Especially because a lot of companies just can't afford to do things right. They can do simple things, and they should be doing simple things like, penetration testing and all the educating and all the things we talked about and having a damage control program, but they can't afford it. So you really have to find a way to help them afford it. Now, that another part of the process is that it is mandatory that information security and IT always keep the C-suite and the board of directors involved, because they have to know what's going on, so that if they are involved and they know what's going on, and when you come to them as someone in information security and ask for things, they understand why it's in the organization's best interests to actually pay for these things and do it. Even if it's something like, for instance, we need to have work-only devices that we supply to our employees. And people will say, oh my gosh, that's expensive. That is nothing compared to the reputational and cost, as well as the actual dollars and cents cost of becoming victimized because you didn't train your people correctly, that you may not have had the right monitoring, you may not have been paying attention correctly, you may not have had controls in place so that if something went wrong, that you could move very quickly to solve the problem.
It always surprises me as we become more and more digital and as we compete with other countries for these skills. There's no national cybersecurity register of past events that companies voluntarily submit information to, so every other company can benefit from this information. Right now, if you're in the cybersecurity space, and if you're a company that needs those skills, you've got to rely on hiring the right people, making sure they have the institutional knowledge and can bring it in, as opposed to there being some kind of federal support in this.
Right. That's important for sure. The other thing is that we need to encourage more training for people to become cybersecurity professionals. I mean, we have a shortage in this country alone of over, I think, 1.5 to 2 million people that we need,
That's a big number.
We don't have because they're not trained yet. Or if they go to work for the government, they're stolen away by private industry. And then, we need as many hands on deck as we can through Cyber Command and a lot of the organizations in Washington that are privacy and security related as well. So we have to focus on that. Education is absolutely critical. And I know there's all debates going on in the US about, support scholarships and everything else for education. I think we need a lot more support scholarships for people at universities who are focused on cybersecurity, because if something goes wrong, which it inevitably does with cybersecurity, the community that it impacts is staggering, and it could result in, an attack on infrastructure that could really derail a lot of things.
So we spend about $750 billion on our military, but we have 1 million to 2 million manpower shortage of cybersecurity experts defending basically industry. That's kind of staggering differential.
Yeah, it is. And, also, the budgets are increasing now in Washington for cybersecurity.
Yes,
Thank
but it's still a
God, because
much lower amount.
way lower, way lower. And we had a former president in his administration who, frankly, didn't think that was a big deal. They got rid of the cybersecurity advisor in the White House. I think for the State Department cybersecurity program, they never funded it. I mean, these are the kinds of things why would you do that? What were you thinking?
Yeah, because if you think about it in a manner of speaking, cybersecurity is one of the pillars of the armed forces.
Oh, it certainly is now. I mean, in the old days, when you would see recruiting commercials for the armed forces, you never heard the word cybersecurity.
Never.
And now in every single ad that they go out of their way to make sure that you hear the word cybersecurity.
So that's the marketing. But
Yep.
in terms of the actual focus, it's still seen as one of the lesser children in the armed forces.
It is. It is.
It'll take time to build it out, invest, and so on.
Oh, absolutely. And the other issue, too, is that there was also disarray, is that there were 62 separate agencies in the U.S. government that had different cybersecurity people. And you say to yourself, isn't there a way for us to be able to work together to come up with a more unified structure, which they're now in the process of doing? Yes. And now we have CISA, which is a lot tougher. But I mean, there were a lot of federal agencies that hadn't implemented something as simple as two-factor authentication until there was literally a crackdown on the agencies by saying, you have a timeline, you have to give us exactly, you got to tell us what you're doing. And there are certain things that we demand that you begin doing that you haven't been doing. And we're shocked that you haven't done it.
So the goal is to not necessarily unify these 62 agencies, but to get them working in concert.
They have to work in concert, but there also has to be more command structure when it comes to this. You just can't have, separate organizations running off, having separate protocols with separate standards, which they're now unifying. But you have to do that. You have to do that.
Is it a fair assessment, just by listening to all this and seeing what we're seeing in the press on a daily basis, that it seems the private sector is more organized when it comes to cybersecurity, at least in the United States, than the government?
1,000% correct. 1,000%. And in fact, the government now is taking advantage of more public-private partnerships than they have before, which is very, very important, especially because there has been a brain drain of people leaving the government going into private industry because they're getting paid a lot more and the requirements are a little bit different. So, we really have to have these partnerships. We have to have threat assessments. We have to have threat sharing. We have to find a way to unify reporting requirements because it is beyond cumbersome for an organization to face all sorts of different notification requirements, timing requirements, depending upon the state or jurisdiction they're in. Then, of course, you have the whole other situation with cyber liability insurance. Whereas the insurance companies initially were, we're there for you when it comes to ransom, to now some of them are taking a position, well, we're not there for you when it comes to ransom because you are giving aid and comfort to the enemy of the United States who, once they attack you, you pay. They're going to come back again, or they're going to go after others. You're encouraging them, you're supporting them. But this is another issue too with companies, is if you're faced with what is a doomsday scenario, which is that maybe you didn't back up the data that you should have backed up. And even if you did back it up, you suddenly find out that the systems you thought were more resilient and robust may not be able to get you back up and running for 6 months to 8 months. And you say, do I pay and I get back, or do I not pay? And that's why there are a lot of organizations that pay, because they need to be up and running. So if you're a healthcare organization and you're down, people could die. And then you could be in another whole world of hurt. So you have that. Then, of course, the whole nature of ransomware has changed, where it used to be, I come, I freeze your files. I even have a customer service department to help you figure out how to pay me. You pay me, I go away. Now it's, you have ransomware as a service, literally, where people develop the ransomware, and then they basically license it to other people and they get a piece of the action. And oftentimes the people they license it to may not know how to bring someone back from the brink after they've actually used the ransomware in their systems. So you have that issue. Then you have another issue where they say, well, okay, in the old days, we used to get paid, we go away. Now, what's it worth to you while you're paying us to go away, to pay us not to release the data that, oh, by the way, we happen to have stolen as we froze your files?
It sounds like some very enterprising capitalists have gone into ransomware, and they've brought a whole
and
new
there's a
business
third,
models.
absolutely. And there's a third one, which is they then go to your customers and say, oh, by the way, we have your data. So even if they pay us, what's it worth to you to have us not release your data? I mean, we've had cases with, now it's smaller, but it's, to a lot of people, it's a big deal. Patients of plastic surgeons, they would do ransomware. They would basically shut down a practice. The practice would pay. Then they would say, what's it worth to you for us not to release the information on your patients? They pay. And then they go to the patients. This happened to several Beverly Hills plastic surgeons, where they went to the patients and said, what's it worth to you that we don't release your before and after pictures? So,
wow, that's amazing. The sort of thought that's going into this. It's almost there's a whole business behind it with follow up. It's almost been productized. There's channels. It's as if there's a real MBA running things in the background.
oh no, there's a whole different approach to this than there was before. And then there's other things like, of course, you know about when people file fake tax returns using your social security number, and this is in certain ways revolutionized crime, because in the old days, people would make drug deals under street lamps in the middle of the night and run the risk of getting killed or arrested, prosecuted, put in jail, whatever.
Yes.
Now people can sit in a motel room with their feet up on a table, wearing bunny slippers, typing in social security information, date of birth, address, and the like of people, filing fake tax returns, and making more money, at least at the more individual level than at the mafia or crime level.
So with this whole problem with fake tax returns, the issue here is someone gets your real social security number and they file a tax return on your behalf and get the refund. And then when you file your tax return, the IRS says we've already paid you.
They basically say a return has been filed, and you go, well, first of all, I'm entitled to a refund. And they go, yeah, but that was already sent to you. You go, but it wasn't sent to me. And it's like, well, yeah, but we operated with what we had. Now the IRS is giving people PIN numbers, even if they haven't been victims of identity. It used to be in the old days, you had to prove you were a victim, then they would give you a PIN number. So every time you filed, you would have a unique PIN number. Now they're making those PIN numbers available to everybody, which is important. But there's a third tax issue out there, and that's where you get a notice from the Internal Revenue Service that you woefully underreported your income. And the reason is because, unbeknownst to you, someone stole your Social Security information, got a job, and that income is being reported to your Social Security number.
And you don't know about it, so...
You don't know about it. And
so what does the IRS do in that case?
Well, when
you have to prove it wasn't your income.
You have to prove it wasn't your income.
So how do you prove it wasn't your income?
Well, you have to prove that you were a victim of identity theft.
Which is very hard to do.
It's becoming easier to do it. I mean, in the old days, you were absolutely guilty until proven innocent. Yes. And in fact, in the early stages of identity theft, it was viewed that the business was the victim, because a lot of it was credit card fraud.
Yes.
The consumer was not the victim. So meanwhile, as a consumer, you would have your life turned upside down. You would have a negative credit report. You'd be in trouble, but you weren't the victim. You were just kind of collateral damage. That's changed today. And the other thing I tell people is, look, if you find out you have a tax problem, you deal with the IRS and they agree, you get a PIN number, they settle the issue. Don't think it's over, because it's not about them. It's about the fact that someone had enough information about you to file your tax return, which means they have enough information about you to open fake accounts, to get a mortgage on your house, to perpetrate medical identity theft on you, where someone using your information is getting medical treatment or prescriptions or having procedures done,
Yes.
but they think it's you. That's why one of the things people should be doing is when you get an explanation of benefit statement from your health insurer, look at it, read it. You may find out that it says it was you, but you know, looking at it, it wasn't you. And that's happened. We had a case with a woman, 72-year-old grandmother living in upstate New York, that on the same day, her insurance, and it was Medicare, was charged for a sperm viability test and a pregnancy test on opposite sides of the country, neither of which would apply to her.
So it's, we were talking about cybersecurity, but there's a whole huge pillar around protecting your social security number. It seems that way.
It is. And now there's, believe it or not, a huge pillar around protecting your cell phone number, because your cell phone is more ubiquitous now than your social security number.
And it's used for many things like banking in many parts of the world and so on.
And multi-factor authentication. Yep. Yes. And that's the code is sent to that device. So you have to be careful. And it's very important for people to also think of it in a different way as well. It's what I call the 3 portfolio theory. And that is, if you say to someone the word portfolio, the Pavlovian response is investments.
Yes.
But what people aren't considering is that we have other critically important portfolios in our lives beside our professional portfolio or our educational portfolio, or if you're in the entertainment business, your acting or modeling portfolio. But your credit and your identity are both portfolios. And just as you would hope that someone who is professional would be managing your finance or your financial portfolio, you have to be the professional manager for yourself of your identity and your credit, because you need to build it, nurture it, manage it, and protect it. Nobody knows more about what you do than you, and would be sensitive to noticing something that wasn't you, that was claimed to be you. And that the issue with these portfolios is that if any one of them are compromised, it puts pressure on the others. If your investments are compromised and you're running out of money, you rely on your credit. If your credit is compromised, you may be forced to rely more heavily on your investments. You need the cash. If your identity is compromised, that will impact both your credit and your investments, because it will cost you more for money. You will have less money to invest, and it could even jeopardize your ability to get a job, to get a security clearance, all of those things.
It's such a fundamental thing that everyone thinks about every month. Everyone is thinking about this. What is my credit score? Can I afford this? Do I have enough money in my 401k? Right. But while they think about it, they do not think about it holistically with a plan in place. It's a very reactive strategy.
That is correct.
Nobody says, how do I protect my identity? Because I need my identity for this and this and this. No, it's about, well, I saw an ad for a credit monitoring service. Somebody sign up. It's $14 a month. Nothing happened for 11 months. So let me cancel that. That's pretty much the way it's not just the consumer market, the corporate market also reacts in that way. When you look at cybersecurity, do companies invest enough? Do they see it as part of their identity? Is a retailer, or is it a digital player? And
correct.
The most important part there that you mentioned is both the company and the individual has to make this process of managing it part of their identity. It's not something they outsource or it's something they react to. It can become an asset if it's well managed. If you can protect your credit score, think how much that saves you, provided you take good care of it.
When I created a company years ago called credit.com, which I sold in 2015. And one of the things we try to say to people was that credit is your friend. And of course, my colleagues would say to me, are you mad? Nobody thinks of credit as a friend. I said, but think of it in the friendship context. If you are there for your friend will be there for you. If you're not there for your friend, it won't be there for you.
Yes.
They won't be there for you. So therefore, you need to pay attention to your credit. You need to make sure if there's any issue that you resolve it as quickly as possible. You need to pay your bills on time. You need to not use too much of your available credit. You need to have a different mix of accounts. And you really need to be very conscious of it, because it can be part of your security blanket.
Yes.
But if you don't have it, you will be incredibly insecure, just like cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not oh, I solved it, it's done, everything's taken care of, I'm great. Cybersecurity is a marathon. It is a team sport. It is also individual, and it is something where everybody has to work together and take ownership of it. And this is something that's just like even training employees. It's not something where, welcome to our company, here's a manual. It will tell you what you should and shouldn't do in order to protect the company. And then, oh, it's the 1-year anniversary of when you came aboard. Here's the newest stuff on cybersecurity. Cybersecurity and privacy have to be an ongoing conversation on a daily basis.
Yes, I like this model of the 3 portfolios: credit, investments, and identity. It's a great way to frame it. And if people spend a month just focusing on each of them, can you imagine what their lives would be like?
Unbelievable. And just like, when we talk about the middle M, which is how do you effectively monitor so you know you have a problem? You get your credit report. You read your credit report. You don't just say, hey, look, I got my credit report. No, you read it. You look for what you didn't do, as well as what you forgot to do. You need to know, including, is this where I really lived? Because if I see a bunch of addresses that aren't me, then I know I may have a problem. You monitor your credit score. If it takes a sudden precipitous drop, there's only 3 reasons. You didn't pay a bill on time, you're using too much of your available credit, or you're a victim of identity theft. You sign up for transaction alerts, which notify you anytime there's activity in your accounts. You look for more sophisticated forms of monitoring, and you also read your explanation of benefit statements, because this is your life. And what I said when I was head of consumer affairs in New Jersey, and it holds true today, over 40 years later, and that is the ultimate guardian of the consumer has always been, is, and will always be the consumer.
I like that. It's about taking ownership. The buck stops with you.
As the CEO of Microsoft said a year or so ago, he talked about the whole concept of shared responsibility.
Yeah.
We know that government hasn't done enough. We know that business hasn't done enough. And we know the consumers haven't done enough in order to protect all, because you're not only protecting you, but you're also protecting your family, you're protecting your company if you exercise wise cyber hygiene protocols. So you really need to do this. And we weren't trained for it as consumers. We didn't want it. It's not even fair that it's been dumped on us. But, when they always say, well, it is what it is. Well, that's what it is. It is what it is. And it has to be a collaborative effort between business, government, consumers, and the media. We're all in this together.
Adam, thank you so much. I think that this podcast is actually relevant when people tend to overspend, don't watch what they're doing. And typically, once they overspend and they have a hangover from that, they then have some momentum to start cleaning up things.
Correct. And the important thing is, why go through the agony of having to clean up the mess where you can actually prevent to some degree? It's not a slam dunk, because you'll always be vulnerable somewhere. But if you really conduct yourself in a way where you are protecting your privacy and you are protecting your assets, because your identity is your asset. Your credit is your asset. Obviously, your funds, your investments are your assets. This is all part of a whole. It's part of a holistic view of things. And you got to start early. You got to start your children early. They got to understand from the earliest age, because they are all now digital natives. They have to understand from the beginning what it means to have a password, what it means not to have a password, how you can be exposed. I mean, the cases of child identity theft are legion. And it's, when a young person becomes a victim of identity theft, and oftentimes it's because a member of their family stole their identity, that when they turn old enough to actually be able to benefit from credit, their credit has been destroyed. And it takes them 7 years to put it back on track again.
Wow. 7 years. That's a long time.
10 years for bankruptcy, 7 years for credit issues.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to have you.
Listen, thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope this was helpful.
It was helpful. I think our audience is going to like it. I like the way you humanize the subject, which can become very technical and boring, and that's why nobody actually follows it. But I think I like the way we switched between corporate, government, and consumer, because as I mentioned earlier, this tends to be a consumer topic, but I wish more executives also thought about it.
It's very important because you're protecting your company and you're protecting all of your consumers. So it's all of us.
Take care, Adam. We'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.